there, art nerds! Today we are talking about Meiliang Pigments again. So a couple years ago, we took a look at their half pan set and I really enjoyed them. These are Paul Rubens student grade line of watercolors and I think they punch well above their weight. So well, in fact, that they kind of became what I recommend to other people who are looking to get started on watercolor on a budget. I highly recommend their half pans. So when the Frugal Crafters shared that these were on sale during either Black Friday or Prime Day, and they were at a pretty good price, I decided to bite the bullet and try out the tubes because I wanted to see if they were as good as the half pans, but I also wanted to see if they might be a good option for watercolor art kits. So today we are going to unbox, we're going to swatch, we're going to set them up in half pans, we're going to compare them to the original half pans, and we're even going to field test the Meiliang Pigments watercolors. Hey art nerds, you guys have heard me talk up Meiliang watercolors for years by this point. And now I finally have a chance to check out their tubes. And what I'm hoping is that these will be an affordable way for me to kind of sub-pack these out and include with certain watercolor kits. So I am looking for an affordable price point, but I'm also looking for the same really great quality that I've come to expect from Paul Rubens student grade watercolors, Meiliang watercolors. So I am really looking forward to unboxing, swatching, and putting these to the field test so we can figure out if these are going to be high enough quality for me to want to include in art kits while still being at a low enough price point that it's affordable for me to do so. Let's go ahead and get these open. They have been shrink wrapped in a cardboard box with a little bit of silver-esque printing. This product is recommended for professional use and for ages 14 and up, so don't paint it on your body, y'all, and probably use it for its intended use. And as with many things we've been talking about recently, this is an AON product, and that's kind of the parent company for Paul Rubens and Meiliang. There's a couple of QR codes, and then we have our Amazon sticker on there that kind of allows them to identify it. So this was purchased from Amazon, and I'm cutting up the box because I am talking as I cut. And I actually found out, one, that Meiliang has tubes out now, and two, that they were on discount because the Frugal Crafter shared a link. So thank you for influencing me to give these a shot. So inside the cardboard box, which admittedly is not as nice as some of the Paul Rubens boxes, and we can talk about that in a little bit. Inside the box is a little bit of a brochure that shows what colors are in each set. I appreciate this. I translated this information a long time ago. This looks pretty similar to what came with their half pans, so I'm not going to do that here. And then underneath the foam are our 36 tubes of watercolor in kind of a flocked line interior, very similar to their Paul Rubens paint. These are little metal ointment tubes. You can see the little piercer here at the top. And ointment tubes are a choice that companies make when they're looking to cut costs. And it means that all of our little tubes are sealed rather than the cap sealing them. I have found that in my experience when I review ointment tube watercolors, they are not high quality watercolors. However, I have had such good experiences in general with Paul Rubens and with Meiliang Pigments that I'm going to move forward. It has our color number, our color name, our color carrier, in this case, Acacia Senegal, so gum Arabic, our pigment, our transparency, our light fast information, it is 5 milliliters. And then our information printed in English on the back. So I believe that these were created for an international market release, which is kind of exciting because now we're starting to see more Chinese high quality watercolor brands being made available in the US at a comparable and competitive price point. So maybe this will make decent quality watercolor supplies a little bit more accessible for people who are looking to get into watercolor. So what I am hoping to accomplish today is to decant all 36 colors into a small homemade palette and do the from wet swatching. Then I'll let them dry out for at least a week. It will come back and we'll see how well they reactivate, how the colors hold up, if they work any better in, dried half pan format. I paint my comic using dried out half pans in my mega palette. So this is my preferred way of working, but I swatch both ways because I have friends who prefer to work straight from the tube, and I want to be able to test the properties of both so that this review is helpful to as many people as possible. That said, a little bit of caveat here. I'm a watercolor comic artist. I paint watercolor comic pages. I make the comics 7-inch Cara, which you guys can read at 7inchcara.com, and I sure hope you will. It would really mean a lot to me. Or you can purchase volume 1 and volume 2 in the Dead Tree format to keep for yourself, to give as a gift, or to donate to your local library, barbershop, hair salon, anywhere where there's bored young kiddos who might enjoy a fantastic tale about tiny people, friendship, and adventure with an ADHD coded main character. And let's be real, her mom is ADHD coded as well. Like, I wrote it, who are we kidding, right? So I primarily paint watercolor comics and illustration. I'm looking for layering, I'm looking for glazing, I'm looking for color mixability, I'm looking for vibrance. I am not the biggest about light fastness because I primarily work for reproduction. That said, if you're going to be selling your watercolors, I do think you owe it to your originals, particularly, not stickers, not prints. That's not what we're talking about here. Originals. I do think you owe it to your customers to either use archival materials so that the paintings that they pay good money for can last 10 plus years, not, 2 years, or to be honest with them that these were painted with student grade pigments and should be displayed in maybe like not a room that gets full sunlight all the time, not a room that's getting full light constantly, but and maybe to store behind UV protective glass, which frankly is, we just paid to get 2 pieces framed for a benefit, that we're donating 2 pieces of my art for a benefit, and the museum quality UV glass is beautiful and it's non-reflective, but it is very expensive. So that is a consideration. I do try to disclose to my customers when they buy originals what quality of paint it was painted with and whether, it theoretically should stand the test of time or if it should be protected a little bit more. But that is something that many people do care about. I don't do light fast testing here on the channel. Kimberly Crick does though. So if you're looking for, another opinion, the Frugal Crafter and Kimberly Crick would both be sources that I would recommend as trustworthy and people who really vet their paints. So I primarily paint for illustration and for comics. I'm also an art education teacher. I teach kiddos how to make comics, how to draw, and how to paint with watercolor. So I'm going to be looking at these to see if they would be a good fit for my art kits, because I would love to be able to offer my start to finish watercolors as like a watercoloring kit, right? I think that'd be really fun. Or to offer my paper child crafts as like an art kit, right? So I'm looking at these to see if these would be a good solution for my own shop needs, but I'm also looking at these to see if they would be a good solution for students and for people who are getting into watercolor, to see if these are high enough quality. If they're comparable to the half pans, then they're going to pass my test. That's what I'm looking for. But if they don't stand up to the half pans, then I will not be including these in kits, and I will be continuing my search for an affordable but high performing watercolor that is accessible to a lot of people. This was purchased out of pocket with funds raised from Patreon. If you like what I do and you want to help me to continue to do it, you can join me over there. And other than that, I think we have disclaimed all of the things that need to be disclaimed. So this is just a simple, unadorned little tin from Amazon. I bulk buy my half pans, and I have some magnets that I'm going to attach to the back. So I'm going to get that set up first because we have 36 of these. That's going to take a while. This is a 36 color set, so it's the same size as my half pan set, and I'm interested to see if this will work well for kits. The tubes include, they are ointment tubes. They include the color number, the color name, the carrier agent, pigment information, transparency, light fast information, and they are in 5 milliliter tubes. Most of this information seems to be in English, and it seems like this was designed for the international market. The colors in this set are white, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, orange yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium red, vermilion, scarlet, magenta, deep magenta, madder red, rose red, fresh purple. There is another fresh purple with a different number, deep violet, light sky blue, fresh blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine, turkey blue, Prussian blue, Payne's gray, yellow green, tree green, hooker's green, deep hooker's green, emerald green, olive green, yellow ochre, yellow sienna, sienna, burnt sienna, Van Dyke's brown, burned brown, and coal black. I want to compare these against other Paul Rubens products at a glance. I've created a spreadsheet that I've shared with my patrons, and I'm going to include the Meiliang Pigments tubes and half pans to the best of my ability into that spreadsheet. So while I am decanting these into half pans, I noticed that the white has a lot of separation. You can't really mix the gum arabic and pigment because it's pressurized since it's in an ointment tube. The white was really loose and liquidy. These may be challenging for someone with hand health issues or grip issues. These might be a lot of work for kit inclusion. These are very liquidy and might not work for folks who like to set it up in half pans while they're still wet. I can see this part of the test failing due to color control, but it might work better with larger ceramic palettes with loads of mixing space. I'm currently having a pain flare up in my hands on the day that I'm recording this, and these are really difficult for me to operate with that pain. These are really loose. They're really liquidy. They, as you guys can see, we got a flat pour with a lot of them. I ended up getting some on my hands. Also, those tubes. Now I'm having a Sjogren's flare up today. My hand hurts really bad. I've been drawing and painting and I just kind of pushed myself too hard. So I thought, oh, I'll do some paint swatching. That's pretty laid back. That's pretty easy. Those little tubes were really hard to get open. They were really hard to pierce. One of them was being one of the yellow ochres was just being really stubborn. So if you have hand health or grip strength issues, these might not be a good fit for you. Also, when you're piercing those tubes, you have to be really careful not to apply any pressure to the tube itself because it's going to explode everywhere if you do. So now that we've got everything decanted, it's time to do our first set of swatches while they're still wet. I foresee we're going to have a lot of color and paint management issues with this, just kind of based on the way that I paint. So if you're somebody who likes to work straight from the tube and you're working on a ceramic palette, these might be a better fit because they may release a little bit more immediately than some other brands. However, that is not how I paint and that is not how I'm going to test. So you know, you're just gonna have to like bear with me. These are so loose and wet, color control like this from a half pan is very challenging. For a beginner impatient to get started with watercolor, the Meiliang half pans are going to be a better fit. They're already decanted, dried, and ready to go. Okay, while wet for me, these already have color control issues, so working with them this way is not a good fit for me. I think though that a lot of these issues will resolve when these have dried out for a week, and it'll be interesting to see how much they shrink. Some of the neutrals in this format are pretty unimpressive. They're too similar or too weak to really be useful, and you guys will see that when I get to them. These do have some interesting granulation, but that might also be due to the sheer amount of paint thrown at the paper. I feel like these don't really include a lot of extenders, just a lot of gum arabic. And it's going to be interesting to see how much these shrink after drying for a week. You guys can see how full these half pans are right now. So these have dried. You guys could see how much I was struggling with just kind of controlling the paint. I was picking up a lot. So I'm hoping that after a week of drying out, that, you know, these will be a little bit easier to control and we can get some clearer swatches and a better idea of how these will handle. All right, my friends, it has been more than 1 week. And that means it's time to revisit our Meiliang half pans. So these are pretty dry. Some of them are also pretty dusty looking. And you guys can probably see they also evaporated pretty significantly. So before we swatch these and test them out, we're going to need to reactivate them with just a little bit of clean water. These have shrunk significantly as they dried out. I'm reactivating them with some clean water, and I noticed that white had difficulty reactivating, but no other color had reactivation issues. It's much easier to handle these paints this way and to control the color. So my swatch test, most colors activate with no issue and are bright, saturated, and easier to handle than their from tube counterparts. There isn't much granulation as one might hope, but it might be due to these paints being more finely milled. I do see some scaling at the water line, so where I added in water to blend them out on certain colors, some of the greens for example. While these swatches dry, I'm going to do a little bit of color mixing in the space that I have available. It's not a whole lot of space, but I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that we're probably going to be doing a field test with these, and we're definitely going to be doing a wet into wet test. With color mixing, while these were wet, I was able to mix bright and vibrant secondary mixes for the most part. Some of the color choices like Opera Rose, one of the lighter violets, the Vertiver Blue, make for interesting mixes. The color swatches are mostly dry, but some of them are still kind of wet. So while I wait for them to finish drying, I'm going to switch on over to the wet into wet test. For this test, I'm going to switch over to Bao cotton rag watercolor paper. It's fine. I have used this for other tests before, so I know how it's going to perform, although it'll be interesting to see how it handles in the wet into wet test. And part of the reason I am switching over to this right now is my smaller Blick pad is currently occupied with something else that's drying, but also because it's a good opportunity to see how this would handle for a wet into wet test and whether this might be a direction I want to move in the future for these kind of smaller cotton rag pads. Like the Paul Rubens, the colors in the Meiliang tube set really diffuse out. I do feel like there's probably some amount of dyes for certain colors, as there isn't much granulation like I'd hope to see, but I'm also not seeing any haloing or scaling at this point. So now that the wet into wet test has dried, we can kind of take a closer look, and I don't really see any scaling or haloing, but I do see what kind of gives me, especially this opera rose down here, the feeling that they really leaned on dye-based watercolor for these, or dye-based media to make these watercolors. And we saw this a lot during the student grade showdown, so much. And even with regular watercolors, there are going to be some colors that are dye-based. That's how we get lake pigments. Certain colors are only achieved via dye, like indigo is a dye-based color and carmine is a dye-based color. So the inclusion of dye-based colors here and there isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can affect light fastness, and it is something that I want to point out, especially because I've had all this experience reviewing a bunch of dye-based watercolors as part of the student grade showdown, and I know enough now to kind of look for those properties, and I know how they handle, and I know what they can and cannot do, and I know that typically I'm not really a big fan. So something I need to do is we need to do our lift test on our swatches, but then I need to do our head-to-head swatches against the Meiliang half pans that I bought a few years ago, the thing that kind of kicked off the student grade showdown, to see how similar they are. You guys might think, oh, this is going to be pretty one-to-one. The sets are the same size, they should have the same colors, but as we saw with many of our Paul Rubens reviews, they switch things out all the time, and Meiliang is one of the student grade offerings from Paul Rubens' parent company, so it wouldn't really surprise me if they switched out some colors. Next, we're going to do the lift test, and we're looking for both some colors to lift and other colors not to lift. We don't want everything to be super lifting. We don't want nothing to lift at all. Certain colors and certain pigments are going to be more likely to lift, and some are going to be more likely to stain. So we're looking for like some variety. These were swatched over a week ago, and these were swatched about an hour and a half ago, but I'm hoping to see consistency between the two sets of swatches. So with these older, thicker swatches up here at the top, these are more lifting than I expected, maybe because they're piled up. This is kind of what I meant by color control. It was difficult to grab just the amount of paint that I needed with these because they are so wet and so liquidy. So they would be more likely to lift because they're really piled up onto the paper. With the newer swatches from the dried pans, the earth neutrals don't really lift, but there is a lot of lifting in the blues, reds, and yellows. So now for the part I think everyone's been waiting for. We are going to comparatively swatch the older 36 color Meiliang Pigments palette. Pretty excellent. This is the one that kind of sailed 1,000 ships for me. We're going to swatch this palette against this palette. They're tubes that I bought just last year. We're going to do head-to-head swatches on Blick Cotton Rag watercolor paper. Here's the older Meiliang half pans. I bought this set, let's say about 4, maybe 5 years ago at this point, so the formulation may have changed a bit. I am going to have all the colors in this set listed out in the show notes if you guys want to compare, but I'm also going to share a spreadsheet with my patrons that will also have as much comparative information as I have access to, since pigment information is not really available for some of these products sometimes, especially with student grade stuff. So these offer bright, bold, saturated colors. Everything reactivates quickly. It's basically like I remember it being. I really like this palette. I find this to be a palette that's very easy to use, and it's one that I still recommend to older beginner painters, so older teenagers, adults. And the reason I caveat that is I'm not entirely certain that there isn't toxic or dangerous materials being used in these. I can't, 100% say it's safe for kiddos. So thus I would not recommend it for kiddos, especially not with no supervision. Anyway, all the colors are beautiful. I just happened to realize that I was going to run out of space. So I had to kind of abbreviate how I was handling the swatches for these. Here are the tube paints. And as I'm swatching these, I did realize that I missed a color while I was swatching the half pans because my colors don't line up quite perfectly. Now, some of the colors in the half pan seem maybe a bit fainter, but that could also be chalked up to how I swatch these. Otherwise, the tubes and half pans are almost identical. I don't know if maybe in a slightly different color order, again, since I might have missed a color there. You probably can use the tubes to refill the half pans if you wish. Again, without having all of the pigment info in front of me, they may have changed the formulation some, but let's be real. If you are refilling the Meiliang half pans with the tubes, if you're refilling a student grade set like this, it being 100% perfect is probably not the most important thing to you. I think it being like 90% perfect, 90% a good match is probably the closest that most folks would be looking for if they're using a student grade product, because really we're after that color. So in general, the newer Meiliang Pigment tube watercolors handle very similarly to the half pans, similar colors, similar granulation. Other than me, maybe I think I got a little bit off in how I was swatching. I think I might have missed a color maybe, or swatched something twice. I had a little bit of a headache and I was a little bit distracted when I was swatching the half pans. They seem to be the same colors, and you probably could refill your Meiliang half pans with the Meiliang tubes if you wanted to do that. While I love the Meiliang watercolors though, I would just suggest just upgrade to a different brand if you've used up all your Meiliang and you're ready to, because that sounds like you're painting a whole lot, right? Like it might be a good chance to move over to more professional grade watercolors and start collecting professional grade watercolors if that's even something you're interested in. Some people do all their painting with student grade and they're very happy with it, in which case, yeah, you could refill it from the tubes if you want to. It seems like it's a pretty one-to-one correlation with the same colors, which is nice to see, because with the Paul Rubens watercolors, they switch stuff out all the time, and I don't think you could easily refill their half pans from their tubes if you wanted to. So I gave this a lot of thought because, as I mentioned earlier, I am considering offering art kits for different kinds. I already offer an art kit, the Paint Your State kits, but I've been considering offering like painting people art kits, or maybe art kits around some of my start to finish tutorials. And I wanted something that had a lot of colors, that handled very well, but had a lower price point so that I could actually afford to offer these in a kit. And so far, they're looking pretty good. I'm feeling pretty confident that these might be a good fit for what I'm looking for, although the price is still not quite there. But it's definitely looking quite promising. So what I think I'm going to do is, when I did the initial Meiliang half pans review, I tested it out on, I believe it was Stonehenge cotton rag paper. I'll include a clip from that here. And I was thinking that if I did the kits, it's kind of a toss-up right now about whether or not I would do it on a cotton rag paper or I'd offer it on a cellulose paper and thus offer it at a lower price point or offer more images for people to paint. Kind of waiting to see what you guys think about that. But I thought it would be kind of smart to do this on a cellulose paper. Maybe even do this kind of start to finish tutorial style. So I think I'm going to do my field test on Canson XL watercolor paper, and that will also give you guys kind of a good idea of how, if you did buy the kit and you finished out the projects in the kit, how you could use these same paints for your own watercolor illustrations. If you would like to learn how to draw, ink, and paint this rose illustration, I have actually recorded this as a separate tutorial where I walk you through the whole process. So please keep an eye out on that. I haven't decided if I want to share that just to patrons or if I want to share it to YouTube publicly. So if it isn't live and you would like to see it available publicly, I guess comment and I'll strongly consider it. My tutorials don't do as well as I'd like here on the channel, so it's always a little bit discouraging to share them. So if there is a demand and you do want to see it and you have a particular interest in this one, please do let me know. So I am working in a Canson XL watercolor sketchbook. I'm using the same materials for the most part that I always use for my start to finish tutorials. And the reason I'm doing this in a sketchbook is because, as we talked about earlier, I'm considering offering this as a kit watercolor. So I wanted to make sure that it would work with the materials that I would include in the kit. And I also wanted to make sure that for the most part, it would work with some of the other tutorials that I've created in my start to finish series. And I do like that it has 36 colors. So it's got lots of really bright, vibrant colors. So you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time mixing color. It can be a more immediate thing. Now, while I think mixing color has a lot of value if you're learning watercolor and you're practicing watercolor, learning how to mix the colors that you need, I do think it can be very discouraging for some watercolor artists. And sometimes you just want that quick fix of color, or sometimes you just want to be able to paint along with what other people are working on. I work with a large convenience color filled watercolor palette. Since you guys know, I'm a watercolor comic artist, and there are just some colors that I need often enough, like Payne's Gray, for example, or a neutral tint, that it's better for me to just have it pre-mixed, and that makes painting pages go faster and easier. So I do see some benefits to having a large convenience color palette. I'm making a palette map here, so that way I have a handy actual color reference. These are all basically in mass tone, and they were swatched out with a flat watercolor brush. I probably haven't mentioned it yet in this video, but I paint with filtered distilled water since I live in an area of the country that has really hard water with a lot of minerals in it. And I don't want that to affect how the paints and how the watercolors handle. I am using a large ceramic plate from my local Asian market. I really like this plate. It's got a lot of grooves, a lot of divots. So it actually makes this kind of watercolor where I need to mix up a lot of color, but I also need a lot of water and color control. It makes it really pretty easy. So if you're looking for affordable palettes, consider checking Dollar Tree and your local Asian market. So with this, I really do want to focus more on talking about how the paints are handling and talking about the properties of the paint, since I did talk about the actual process for this in the tutorial itself. So I decided to kind of like throw the book at this thing. I'm doing a lot of wet into wet. I'm doing a lot of encouraging bleeding. I'm doing a lot of really large washes. And for the most part, I felt like it could handle it decently well. If you enjoy the original half pans, you'll enjoy these. I opted to do a start to finish field test so that we could kind of test out the kit capabilities, but also because these are student grade watercolors and I've already field tested the half pans on a cotton rag paper. The colors activated readily, handle well in dilution or in saturation, although there are probably more opaque colors than you might expect. So perhaps doing 1,000 layers with these is not the best option. Colors blend and mix wet into wet readily, as you guys can see with the roses. You can definitely layer these and get some really nice color buildup again with the roses. So far, these watercolors layer well. You can get some nice translucent layers to build up color. I love the combo of warm yellows and hot pinks because it's luminous. On the rose heads, I do see a little scaling, especially on the edges of the green. It's not too bad, but it's like the first time I've really noticed scaling with Meiliang. With heavier wet into wet mixes like on the leaves, the red doesn't always disperse as far. These aren't really deal killers for me. We're talking student grade here, but definitely something you should be aware of. I don't remember this being an issue with the half pans on cotton rag, so it could be a cellulose issue as well, since cellulose throws some of these problems. These did cloud the liner, as you guys can probably see, quite a bit, but not as badly as you might expect, or as badly as I've seen with some cheaper watercolors. If you want to go back and add dry over dry highlights, there isn't much saturation and coverage to be able to do that, at least compared to some other professional watercolor paints. And again, these are student grade. These are not a professional grade. If you're looking for the more professional line from this brand, I've reviewed a lot of Paul Rubens. I'll try to remember to link that for you guys. And I do need to add the color information to the best of my ability into that spreadsheet for those of you who like to get really nerdy and really comparative and really be able to weigh your pros and cons and weigh your options with these. But in general, I had fun painting with these. I didn't struggle to use them. I didn't have to overthink everything. I didn't have to outthink the watercolors, which is a good sign when it comes to student grade watercolors, because I have reviewed so many student grade watercolors where I really have to outthink them. And frankly, if you have to overthink something, that doesn't make it a good product for a beginner. To me, a good product for a beginner should be a very straightforward representation of how the product should handle, whether it's a paint or whether it's a paper. And that's why in general, if people are looking at student grade sets, with the exception of the Meiliang, I would recommend instead of going student grade, you purchase a test set from a professional brand. Those tend to be marketed a little bit cheaper. They're a little more affordable because they want people to try them out and they'll last longer. And that way you get a real feel for what watercolor should be able to do and how it should handle. That said, I was very satisfied with how the Meiliang Pigments tube paints handled. They're very comparable to my experience with the Meiliang half pans, and this is something that with supervision I would use with my teenage students. I might use with my adult students. I was also able to do some dewdrop lifting, and I'll explain that technique in the tutorial, but it's cool to be able to use a lot of just very common popular watercolor techniques like wet into wet and diffusing and lifting with these student grade paints on a very inexpensive paper. I would say these are great paints for those of you who enjoy working in a sketchbook like this one here. That way, if you are trying to save your expensive paints, you can save your expensive paints, but you still have wonderful, bright, luminous paints for your sketchbook or to teach in your classes, or like me, to possibly offer in kits. Here's the finish, start to finish illustration. I hope you guys, if you're interested, will check out the tutorial if you're a patron, and if not, let me know down in the comments that you would like to see this available publicly as a tutorial. If there's demand, I can maybe make it happen. And please check out my other start to finish tutorials. I'll try to remember to link them down in the description for you guys. So what are the pros and cons of the Meiliang watercolor tubes that promise rich pigments, pure colors, and excellent diffusion? They are inexpensive. They're basically the same as the half pans in terms of handling and quality. So if you want to refill the half pans, you can. It's a good student grade watercolor that might be good for class use, like teaching high school watercolors, and they set up well in half pans. What initially drew me to these was the possibility of offering them as a kit watercolor, and I think they perform pretty well with that, with some caveats. However, I still need to field test the Supervision tube watercolors, and there's a few other brands that I'd like to do a little bit of testing with before I make a commitment. So what are the cons? Well, I did notice, and let me see if I can get it to pick it up because I did paint over it. I did notice some scaling, but I'm not sure if that's just, me doing this on cellulose paper or if it's from the watercolors themselves, because cellulose can scale sometimes too, even with nicer watercolors. The tubes are a little on the small side. They're 5 milliliter tubes. So if you were buying these for class use, you would probably run through them pretty quickly. The paints themselves are very liquidy. So for my friends who like to work with the paint straight from the tube on a ceramic palette, I'm not sure how that would affect you. Let me know down in the comments below though if you do like that kind of a property or if you really dislike that kind of a property and you find it difficult to work with. I did find that they set up well in half pans, so it isn't as big an issue for me, but there was also significant shrinkage, like they really dipped down. The paint, these are not quite as transparent as you'd like. They did muddy the line art, and I did re-ink the line art a little bit just to kind of clear it up just a little bit. But they're also not quite as opaque as you would think. So basically they don't have any coverage for details. And I'm legitimately not sure about Meiliang's light fastness, so these may not hold up over time if you were painting these to sell or if you were painting them for display, which is why they might be a good fit for kits with the understanding like don't display it in full sunlight, but I wouldn't recommend painting a watercolor illustration that you intend to sell with these. So what's my verdict on the Meiliang Pigments tubes? I liked the Meiliang Pigments half pans a couple years ago, and I like the tubes as well. If you prefer working from tubes and are looking for inexpensive, saturated, and bright watercolors, you're probably going to enjoy these. I can see brush letterers really enjoying these as the colors are so immediate and saturated. I also think abstract and loose floral watercolor artists may like these as well for similar reasons, and because the palette lends itself well to florals. I can also see these being a good fit for watercolor comic artists and illustrators as they perform well on both cellulose and cotton rag papers. However, the fact that they do have a little bit of opacity to them and that adds kind of a filminess to the illustration depending on how you work, maybe make or break. If you ink your comics and then paint them, I don't think it'll work very well. If you pencil them and then paint them, I think you'll probably be fine. So I was very pleasantly surprised. So while the tubes are a little bit smaller and perhaps not as impressive as some tubes I have seen, they set up into half pans quite well. They reactivate into bold, bright, and brilliant colors. They are pretty comparable against their half pans, as you guys saw when we did the comparative swatch off. And because we tested the half pans on a cotton rag paper years ago, I decided to test them on a cellulose paper this time because honestly, cotton rag is the better version. Okay, so I have two trains of thought going. We're gonna start with, when I talk about cheaping out with watercolors, I usually say that you can cheap out in one area. You can either go with cheaper paints or you can go with cheaper paper. And generally when I am testing out watercolors, I do my field test on cotton rag paper because it is the nicer version of the paper. It's more forgiving, it can take more water, it's less temperamental, it's less likely to just randomly lift off the paper surface. So generally when I do field tests on cotton rag, I feel like I am being as fair as I possibly can be. And if the paints are going to perform well, then they're going to perform well. And if the paints are going to perform badly, then we know it's the paints. I decided to go with cellulose this time for a couple of reasons. One, we already did cotton rag and they performed really well on cotton rag. I wanted to see how they would perform. Actually, I also did them on eggs. Do you guys remember when I did watercolor on eggs? Did them on eggs. They paint on eggs. So if you want to paint eggs, now you know. But I wanted to see how they would handle on a cellulose paper. And also because if I do watercolor kits and I decided to do a spiral bound pre-printed booklet of line arts that you could paint along with me, there is a good chance that those would be on Canson XL watercolor paper because for its price, I like how it handles and not everyone is willing to pay the extra price it would cost for cotton rag paper. So for an art kit, sometimes you have to consider where you can cut corners but still deliver a good product. So I thought there was a fair chance that the kits would be printed on cellulose paper since they would be to correspond with my start to finish tutorials, and those were done on Canson XL watercolor paper. So you can follow the train of thought. I try not to change too many variables at a time. And long story long, I was impressed with how they handled. Were they perfect on the Canson XL? No. There were a few problems, but let's be real. Canson XL has a few problems. Like, it could have just been the Canson XL. I was happy with how they handled diluted. I was happy with how they layered. I was happy with how the colors mixed. I was happy with how they reactivated. I was happy with how they lifted. I was generally happy with how they handled wet to wet. I was mostly happy with how they handled in full saturation. I was a little disappointed that I couldn't go back in and add opaque details using like the cool yellow. But come on, there was a lot there that I was pretty happy about. So I would say this was a pretty good test. I feel comfortable with, this is not me saying I'm going to use these in a kit, okay? I'm still testing a few other student grade watercolors to see if there's anybody better out there. I have a supervision field test or a supervision review that I'm in the middle of working on. I may be open to trying out some other brands. I may just opt to go with PWC professional grade watercolors instead. I'm still figuring things out, so this is not a definite, but I would feel comfortable including these in kits. I wouldn't be embarrassed with how they handled. I could stand behind the quality of the paints. And I also would be okay with using these for classes. So I'm actually very satisfied with the results of today's unboxing swatch. Oh, one more thing that I'm sure some of you guys are skipping to the end to find out. The colors in these tubes are really dang close to the colors in the half pans. There might be some minor discrepancies, but nothing that came up in a head-to-head swatch. So if you want to know if you can refill the half pans with these tubes, the answer is probably yes. So I was happy with today's results. It's always good to have nice news to share with you guys because in the end, I want to help you guys find art supplies that will work for you and art supplies that will make you happy. And I am not that artist who thinks you have to always buy the most expensive thing in order to get the best. It just happens with watercolor that often the more expensive paints are the nicer paints that will make you happier, but that is not an end-all be-all, and that is not always true. And that's why I try my best to review art supplies that haven't saturated the market yet, that other people maybe haven't heard of, so that I can help you guys find art supplies that you love and art supplies that will help you guys make art a habit, because I think it being affordable, it being accessible, and it also performing well, that's all important to you making art a part of your day-to-day life. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today for our Meiliang Pigments unbox and swatch review. I hope it was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. If you guys would like to paint along with me, paint this field test along with me, I have already shared the line art with my patrons on Patreon, and I am also going to use the footage from this field test to make a start to finish tutorial that I will probably make backer exclusive. So if you join me at patreon.com/nightofsoup, not only will you help me make more videos like this one, because I use the money from my Patreon to help purchase the supplies that I reviewed. These were not sent to me, these were purchased. And I used the money, the ADHD kicked in, brain went dumb. I used the money to buy the supplies that I review, and it also means you get early access to reviews like this one, and you also get access to the line arts, and you also get backer exclusive access to the materials that I create for my in-person classes. So it's a win-win situation where I receive money so I can continue hoarding art supplies, I can continue buying art supplies to talk about with you guys, and you guys get cool coloring sheets, you get class materials, and you get inside my head. So thank you guys so much. Speaking of patrons, these amazing people are the folks who make videos like this possible. I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. I am working on that supervision review, so that's probably coming up in the near future. If you are interested in learning more about watercolor, whether it is student grade, I have a student grade showdown where I reviewed a bunch, so many student grade watercolors. And I also have professional grade watercolor reviews if you are looking to buy some paints. I also talk about watercolor papers and brushes if you're wondering what supplies are a good fit for you. And I have loads of watercolor tutorials from making comics to painting people to my start to finish series, even to my Stash Buster series, which is designed for folks who have no drawing ability, but they love color and they want to get to painting. I have something hopefully for almost everyone. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope to see you guys again really soon, and we can make sure that happens if you click the subscribe button and hit the bell notification, because I know sometimes I think I'm subscribed to somebody and because YouTube keeps recommending their videos for me, and then I go on vacation or I watch a TV show for a week and they quit being recommended to me because I was not subscribed to them. YouTube was just trying to feed me more of what I was already watching. So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on what I'm doing here, make sure you hit subscribe and click the bell notification. It's totally free, and I love making these videos for you guys. And y'all subscribing to my channel helps make that a possibility. In fact, I joined the National Art Materials Trade Association this year. I'm not good at acronyms. That would be NAMTA. And one of the many questions they asked me is how many subscribers I had on YouTube, on Pinterest, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. And YouTube is probably the reason I got accepted into NAMTA, which means I now have access to all this art supply information and all these art supply seminars, and I can use the information I'm learning as a member to inform my reviews and to maybe get early access to supplies to review and talk about with you guys. And it just helps me be a better art supply reviewer. So I have access to that, I believe, because I have a decent little following here on YouTube. So I sincerely appreciate all of you who are here for my journey, whether you just joined me right now or you've been with me for a really long time. You OG folks, y'all make me so happy. And yeah, that's basically it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys again soon with another art supply review, tutorial, artist chat, or easily influenced. Bye guys!